All right, so we're going to spend the next few weeks talking about counting your blessings, and I thought it would be fun to start off by blessing you with a joke. I don't tell too many jokes, but it's not a funny story. It kind of fits. And so there's this New York City lawyer who decides he wants to go dove hunting, and he comes to our fine state of Texas to go dove hunting. And he's out in the fields, and there's some pastures around him, and he finds out, he shoots the dove, and it falls into this pasture, so he has to climb over the fence to get to it. And as he's about to get over the fence, rancher pulls up on a tractor, and he's the owner of the property. He says, "What do you think you're doing on my property?" And the hunter says, "Well, I've shot a bird, and I'm going to get it." And the rancher says, "This is my property, and you best be getting off of it right now." And of course, that upsets the hunter. He says, "I'll have you know that I am a lawyer from New York City, and if you don't let me get my bird, I'm going to sue you for everything that you're worth." And the rancher says, "Well, down here in Texas, we settle this kind of dispute with what we call the Texas three-kick rule." And the lawyer, the hunter, says, "Well, what is that?" And the rancher says, "It's real simple. I'm going to kick you 3 times, and then you're going to kick me 3 times, and I'll kick you 3 times, and we'll keep doing this until one of us gives up. And then the dispute will be settled." And the lawyer didn't have to wait too long to think about this. He says, "I'm younger, I'm stronger, I'm smarter. I can take this guy." So he says, "All right, we'll settle this using the Texas three-kick rule." So the rancher climbs down off of his tractor and walks up to the lawyer. And before the lawyer even has a chance to prepare himself, the rancher kicks him right in the shin with his cowboy boot. And he bends over, and so the rancher kicks him right in the gut. He falls down on the ground. The rancher kicks him right in the side of the head. The lawyer's seeing stars, and he's laying there for a few minutes, but he gets up and he's like, "All right, I'm going to show this old man. Now it's my turn." And as the lawyer moves towards the rancher smiles and says, "No, I give up. Go get your bird." And I think sometimes in our lives, we feel as though we've been kicked down and we don't always get our opportunity to kick back. And so that's where we're going to start today. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that we have in our lives and the difficulties that sometimes make it hard to see the blessings in our lives. Because I think all of us, if we start talking about counting our blessings, almost instinctually think, "Oh, well, I've got it so rough." And that makes it hard to see the blessings. But even in those hard times, we can count our blessings. And so that's where we're going to start. And as we go through this series, it's a shorter series than last week, just 4 weeks. You're going to hear from myself and from Greg and from my wife about some of the challenges in our lives and then how we see the blessings through that. And so the scripture tells us that we are ordinary jars of clay. And if that's not an analogy that you've heard before, it's basically explaining that the concept is that Jesus Christ, the precious treasure, is inside of us, but we're just a very humble jar of clay. I might refer to some of you as cracked pots. But the beauty of it is when you're cracked, you're imperfect, those flaws, those cracks in the jar allow the light of Jesus Christ to shine out, and people get to see the gospel through our broken and flawed vessels. And so quite often I hear people use the excuse, "Well, then I'm too flawed or I'm too messed up to serve God." Well, the truth is we're all too messed up to serve God. But we can allow God to shine out through our imperfections. So that's kind of the idea of these jars of clay. God created us to be a container for that priceless treasure of Jesus Christ. And so sometimes if you think about life, sometimes you'll open up an ordinary jacket and realize you got a $20 bill in there that you didn't know. There was this treasure hidden inside an ordinary object. And that's kind of a similar idea. You and I may not be too much to look at. I may not be too much to look at. Y'all make your own opinions about yourself. I heard that. I'm not much to look at, but there's a priceless treasure inside of me in the life of Jesus Christ, living in my life. And so the emphasis is not on the jars of clay, it's on what's inside. A cracked pot is a person who is not perfect, which would be everybody in this room, but it represents someone who has a few flaws in their life, but has this treasure inside. And in this message, we're going to take a look at how we get these cracks, and then why God uses pain to make us to be better vessels of service. And we'll continue that over the next few weeks. So God allows us to be cracked, but not crushed. And I think a lot of times we ask that question, especially when I talk about counting your blessings. I hear the whole question about, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Well, if you read the Bible, it says that there is no one good, not even one. So we're not really good people. So we don't have to worry about bad things happening to us as good people. But the question could be asked, why do bad things happen to God's people? Because we're God's people, and there's still bad things that happen to us from time to time, and we have to see beyond that. Paul is a great example of that. Paul was a bad dude when he was Saul. He was persecuting Christians, and then he met Jesus on the road to Emmaus, and he was blinded, and he made that process over to becoming a Christian. And even though he was serving Christ, he still had these challenges. He still faced difficulty. But Paul mentions a few sources here in Corinthians about the difficulty. I like Corinthians quite a bit because I think the state of the Corinthian church at the time Paul was writing to them is very much like the state of America today. And if you do some comparisons, you'll see some of the challenges that the Corinthians had. Some of the Corinthians were even challenging Paul and his authority. But Paul here in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 is talking about some of the sources of pain in his life. He talks about being hard-pressed on every side but not crushed. Trading My Sorrows is one of my favorite songs because it comes straight out of Scripture, and it's right out of this section. But Paul talks about being hard-pressed on every side but not crushed. Now, the word pressed in this context has a lot to do with being confined on each side, which makes sense if you think about a prison. Yeah, I had a lot of trouble coming up with an analogy on being hard-pressed on every side except for one. And I don't know, I think it's appropriate for Sunday morning because it perfectly describes being hard-pressed on every side. Who's seen Star Wars? Like 2 people? Really? There's only 2 people in here that have seen Star Wars? Come on! A lot of people, some proud people in the back. You see Star Wars, so there's the scene where Luke and Leia and them, they're trapped in the trash compactor, right? And the walls are coming in, and they're about to be crushed. They are hard-pressed on every side. But just before the walls crush them, R2-D2 disables the trash compactor, and they live and they escape. And that's in the movies, but it's possible for us to feel pretty much the same way. Sometimes they're invisible walls, but we understand that feeling of having these walls closing in on us and feeling as though we are hard-pressed. It could be financial pressure. It could be difficulties at work. It could be pressure at home or at school. You'll be pressured, but God's word promises that you will not be destroyed. You may be cracked, but you will not be crushed. Paul also says that he was perplexed, but not in despair. Now, the word perplexed was often used to describe someone who had been ruined in business or by his creditors, and he was left with nothing. So the person is at their wits' end and cannot figure out what to do next. That is a good definition of perplexed. Life can be perplexing, and we often get to a point in life where we have no idea what to do next or what direction to turn. And I think Paul was bewildered because he was suffering. At the same time, he was trying so hard to serve God. He had changed his life around 180 degrees. He went from killing Christians to turning people into Christians. And he was putting his life on the line in order to do that. And he starts to face these challenges and the suffering. And the thought had to cross his mind, okay, God, seriously, I'm trying to serve you. I'm doing the very best that I can. Why am I having all these challenges? Why am I suffering? That question had to come up in his mind. And it seems logical that if you love God and you follow God, then life should be fine and dandy. Unfortunately, life is not always logical. But we know it doesn't work that way. Becoming a Christian does not put an end to all of the problems that you're going to have in life. The truth is we all have questions about why good people suffer and bad people seem to prosper. Even the best saints had these second thoughts, these doubts, these questions. John the Baptist is a good example. John the Baptist gets thrown in prison, and he actually sends a messenger to Jesus to say, are you the one we've been waiting for? Are you the Messiah, or do I need to hang out and wait for somebody else? This is the same John the Baptist that baptized Jesus and saw heaven open up and heard the voice of God saying, this is my well-beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And yet, John ends up so perplexed that he has to ask, are you actually the Messiah, or did I just dream all of that? So it's okay to ask questions, but you cannot allow your frustrations to turn into despair. If you remember Job, he asked a lot of questions about why he was suffering, about why he was having a difficult time. And God came to Job And he started asking Job some questions. And God said, Job, when you can answer my questions, then I will answer yours. And yet, in spite of Job's perplexing situations, and he didn't have answers for God's questions, so God didn't give him the exact answer he was looking for, but even though Job was in this perplexing situation, he never gave in to despair. And he even said, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Even if God allows me to die, my hope will always remain in him. That's some pretty awesome faith. And that's what prevents you from hitting despair. My mom was a great woman of faith. She had great faith, and I contribute most of my faithfulness to my experience growing up with my mom. My mom had a favorite author named Barbara Johnson, and she wrote a number of books, and they were always the cheerful books, how to stay cheerful in times of difficulty, that kind of thing. And when my mom passed away, I inherited those books, and I haven't read all of them, but I flipped through them. And Barbara Johnson has this one quote that I really like. She says, I'm glad God has all the answers because I can barely understand the questions. And it's a great way to explain the fact that we don't need to know everything. We don't need to have all of the details. We just got to have faith in God and know that God has all the answers. He knows the questions. He knows the answers. You know, life may become very frustrating for us, and we may find ourselves cracking in certain situations, certain times when we have uncertainties. But even though we're cracked, we aren't going to be crushed. We may be perplexed, but you don't have to end up in that land of despair. Paul also wrote that he'd been persecuted, but not abandoned. Now, we all have a good idea of what persecuted means, treated poorly because of what we believe. But there's another definition of persecuted that I thought was interesting. It refers to the practice of hunters tracking down an animal. And I realized Paul dealt with this because once he became converted and started converting other Christians, there were these radical militant Jews that followed him around just about everywhere he went, trying to arrest him and trap him. Today in Iraq and Syria, we've seen Christians who are being killed because of their faith. They're being persecuted. And persecution against Christians here in America is becoming less and less subtle. It used to be subtle, you know, somebody would just make fun of you or something. It's beginning to get worse. And there are even situations where people's rights are being put on the line because of what they believe. And we probably have gotten used to the taunts and the criticisms that people use to attack us because of our faith. Maybe you know what it is to have friends or family ridicule you because of your faith. Every time they make a sarcastic or cutting remark, you feel those little hairline cracks appearing in your faith. You're not crushed, but you are cracked, and that's okay. But we're not going to be crushed because anyone who has ever dared to do what they thought was the right thing to do has been criticized. Whether you're famous, not famous, normal, everyday Joe, if you've done what you thought was the right thing to do, somebody is going to have a problem with it, and somebody's going to tell you you're doing the wrong thing. Abraham Lincoln is a great example of this. When he was president, he was constantly being attacked by newspaper editors and even politicians from his own party. And if you were to read some of the things that were written about him then, most of the stuff that's written today would seem pretty tame. He had some pretty harsh critics. But Lincoln once wrote something about his attitude toward those who attacked him. And the words were so powerful that the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, kept these words written on his desk during World War II. Lincoln said this, "If I were to try to read, much less answer, all the attacks made on me, this shop might as well be closed for any other business. I do the very best I know how, the very best I can, and I mean to keep doing so until the end. If the end brings me out all right, what's said against me won't amount to anything. If the end brings me out wrong, 10 angels swearing that I was right would make no difference." Basically saying it doesn't matter what other people think. I'm going to do what I believe is right and let things shake out as they may. You may be attacked, you may be persecuted, but you'll never be abandoned by God. Then the fourth thing that Paul says was that he was struck down but not destroyed. When I read struck down, I immediately thought of the rancher and the lawyer. The lawyer was struck down. But this particular case can allude to the Roman gladiator games. And, you know, the two would fight, and the opponent would pin the one person, and they wouldn't complete the test. They would wait for whoever was in charge of the games to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down on whether or not this person would be destroyed. So the person was struck down, but not yet destroyed. Paul was knocked down many times, but he was never knocked out. Because Paul realized that he was not perfect. He used to brag about how awesome he was as a Jew and knowing all of the scriptures and knowing everything. But once he became a Christian, he realized he was not perfect. He was a flawed vessel. And he admitted his own cracks when he wrote things like Romans 7, where he talked about doing the things that he did not want to do and not doing the things that he wanted to do. He recognized that he made some bad choices. And there are times in our life when we get knocked down, and sometimes that's because of our bad choices. But the secret to usefulness is getting back up. You will be struck down. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to be attacked. Just get back up. That's how you remain useful as a servant of God. In 1976, there was an unknown writer, unknown actor. This one doesn't have anything to do with Star Wars, don't worry. But it's still a good one. Anybody ever heard of Sylvester Stallone? Good, okay. So we got a foundation for this sermon right here. Okay, good. In 76, nobody knew who Sylvester Stallone was. And he had written this script about an underdog boxer named Rocky. And he took it to studios, and he kept getting turned down and kept getting turned down. Eventually, he finally found a studio that was willing to film it. They were going to take a chance on this guy. They filmed the whole thing in 28 days. They spent a paltry $1.2 million. I say small because you'll understand in a minute. But we all know Rocky became a sensation. It won Best Picture in 1976. It has made over $117 million. So for them to only spend 1.2 and make that much, they've done pretty well for themselves. There have been 5 sequels. My personal favorite is 4, where he fights the Russian. I think a lot of people like that one. When I was in college, we had a Rocky marathon, and we started in the evening and watched all the Rockies in a row. I'd probably fall asleep before the end of the first one right now. I don't have that kind of energy anymore. But in the fourth one, where he's fighting Ivan Drago, and he's fighting these Russians, he keeps getting knocked down by this big guy, keeps getting knocked down, he keeps getting up. And it's so inspiring that before it's over, the Russians are chanting his name because he just keeps getting up. And so what was special about Rocky? There were bigger fighters. There were more talented boxers. Mr. T, Ivan Drago, Apollo Creed kept pounding on him, but he just wouldn't quit. That's what was special about Rocky. He kept going. He got knocked down, but he kept getting back up. That's inspiring. He even lost the fight to Apollo Creed in the first one. That's the one where even though he's just been pounded by this guy, he still gets up and, Adrian! Everybody remembers that? Seriously, if you haven't seen Rocky, you got to watch it. That was like the best imitation ever right there. Yeah. No, that's all you get. You have to watch the video online later. There's something inspiring about someone who gets up after being knocked down and keeps getting up and keeps getting up. And I've got good news for you. We're in a fight. And that's good news because we already know that we are going to win the fight. The scriptures are very clear on that. It's a fixed fight. We win in the end, and our victory is absolutely certain. But before the final round, you're going to get knocked down. I guarantee it. I'm going to get knocked down. We're all going to get knocked down. The question is, are you going to get back up again? Are you going to keep getting back up? And are you going to keep saying, God, I don't care what happens to me, I'm going to put my faith in you? You say what Job says, though he may slay me, I will yet put my faith in him. So that when you get to the end, as Paul did, will you be able to say, I have fought the good fight? Some of you may feel like giving up today. You want to quit, you want to throw in the towel, you've been knocked down so many times that you don't think you can get back up. I'm telling you today, you can and you will. If you put your faith in God. Get up, stand firm. It's in these struggles that we find our blessings. If we stay down, we end up in despair. We let the devil win. We get frustrated. We allow ourselves to be destroyed. But if we stand up, we can see the blessings on the other side. If we stay on the ground, we're not going to understand the big picture. But if we get up, we can see those blessings on the other side. And if you need to, then picture the movie Rocky and see him laying there on the mat. And he looks out and he sees his manager and he sees Adrian and he gets inspired. And that's why he gets back up. And if that's the imagery that you need to use, do that, but understand that, it's not a manager or a wife that we see, it's the face of Christ. We read verses 7 through 12. If you go back to verse 6, it says this: "For God, who said, 'Let the light shine out of darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ." God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. So the next time you're down, but not out, and you're looking out and you're trying to find a face to get you inspired, it's the face of Christ that will do that for you. God's glory through the face of Christ. That's your blessing. And as I wrap up, I'm going to ask the band to come on up here because you guys are going to play "I Know a Fountain." That's going to be the song that we use during our time here. But that's your blessing, the face of Christ shining on you. Yeah, come on. Band. The face of Christ shining on you. And so in the next 3 or 4 weeks, today's week 1, so the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about the blessings in our lives. We're going to talk about how to identify those blessings. And you're going to use this message, this foundation, to understand that even if I'm having the worst day of my life, I still need to count my blessings. And so your task for this week, this afternoon, and for the rest of this week, if you have a difficult situation, if you have a bad day, if something goes wrong at work or a friend gets in a fight with you, that is your trigger. As soon as that happens, I want you to go, "Oh yeah, I got to count my blessings." As soon as something doesn't go your way, your car breaks down, you go, "Oh yeah, Lieutenant said I got to count my blessings. Let me do that first, then I'll figure out how to deal with this." And I promise you'll have a better week. And it's going to set you up for the coming weeks as we talk about the things that we're thankful for, the blessings that we have in our life. And so we have this moment that my wife talked about right here in front of the holiness table. There's some little cards and some pens. And what we would really like you to do, if you're open to it, as you're thinking about these blessings in your life, and you're thinking about what you're going to focus on, is come on down and write on that card a blessing that's in your life today. And it could be huge, it could be small. But come on down and grab one of those cards, and then we're just going to ask you to leave it on the altar. If you want to pray at the same time, you can do that. Or just leave it on the altar. And like she said, we'll collect them and we'll add them to this painting. And at the end of this series, we'll have this beautiful picture of what we're thankful for as God's family. And so I'm going to come back and we're going to play a song called "I Know a Fount," where sins are washed away. And I just invite you to come forward and write down those blessings for us.